hereby change of company policy concerning use of the suit. Don't. After learning of an unfortunate incident at the Sinister location involving multiple and simultaneous spring lock failures, the company has deemed the suit temporarily unfit for employees.
This voice line has bothered me for years. Literal years. Now, if you asked most people what this was, they would probably say that it has something to do with the spring lock suit that we hear about on night 4 of Sister Location, which we are deliberately told wasn't used in the way that it was meant to be used. However, upon further consideration, I don't think that this is true. Pop quiz. When did Circus Baby's Pizza World open? The exact year is unknown, but at the very least, considering that the springlock suits were already deemed
too dangerous
by the time of Circus Baby's opening, I think that most of us would agree that it happened sometime after the MCI. However, this phone call that's been bothering me so much was made before the MCI. How do I know this? Well, let's take a closer look at FNaF 3's phone calls, starting with what we're told on night 5.
Management has also been made aware that the Spring Bonnie animatronic has been noticeably moved and would like to remind employees that this costume is not safe to wear under any circumstances. Thank you, and remember to smile. You are the face of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
Let's not waste any time here. The Spring Bonnie suit being used when none of these suits are meant to be used is telling us something pretty obvious. William's getting busy. And if William Afton is getting busy using the Spring Bonnie suit when he's not supposed to while at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, well, I'm sure you can put together the rest. This is when the MCI happens, and it's happening at the same time that this message was being recorded. But if that's the case, then it can't be talking about Sister Location. In fact, it can't have anything to do with Sister Location, as Circus Baby's Pizza World was opened after the spring locking incident that made Fazbear Entertainment retire the suits. So then, what's this talking about? I'll level with you. We don't really know. At least, not any specifics. The only thing that we can really gather is the fact that it happened at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. But it wasn't the one where the MCI happened, as that's almost certainly the one that the recording is from. But what if I told you that that's not what this video is about? You see, me and Caitlin found this line when we were doing our first recent dive into FNaF 3, and it spawned the theory that I'm going to present to you today. Today, I'm going to talk about the spring locking incident that you are all familiar with, the missing children's incident. Wait, what? Since when was the MCI a spring locking incident? Well, as it turns out, we have a lot more evidence for that than you probably realize. But to get into that, we'll have to go over some more information we get in the FNaF 3 phone calls. Not the phone dude segments, the Ralph parts. We're gonna start with the first half of them. The training tapes. Ralph's first few messages in this game are training tapes meant for employees of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. These specifically seem to come from an early version of the restaurant, especially for reasons that will become relevant later. Ralph tells us that, at this point in time, they have 2 specially designed suits that function as both animatronics and suits. Almost certainly Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. He never actually tells us about the core 4 at this point in time, but we have plenty of reason to believe that they were brought together quickly. We know that the characters were conceptualized by at least the 1970s thanks to what we see in Proto-Freddy's and Secret of the Mimic, but I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't have the actual animatronics yet. Since we know that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was opened in 1983, the same year as the Big Bite that we see in FNaF 4, it's likely that they were in a rush to open the restaurant to try and pull public attention away from what happened at Fredbear's. Another thing that Ralph tells us during these training tapes is that every single location has a safe room that is entirely hidden to both the public and the animatronics, in addition to being completely off camera and not being included on the digital map of the restaurant. Presumably, this is because this is where employees are meant to bleed out if the spring locks come loose so that they don't ruin the customer experience. This is entirely unrelated to the rest of the video, but it's something that's been really bothering me recently, so I need to get it off my chest. When The Week Before came out, Scott Cawthon somehow managed to trick the entire community into thinking that Ralph is a pure soul that isn't bound by Fazbear Entertainment's corruption, and that he's always meant well by everyone.
In the case that the spring locks come loose while you are wearing a suit, please try to maneuver away from populated areas before bleeding out, as to not ruin the customer experience.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but no. Ralph literally tells everyone listening to these training tapes that if they're gonna get themselves killed, that they should at least have the decency to do it where nobody else can see it. in the one room where there would be no evidence of it happening. This is comically evil. And this is Ralph that we're hearing. Scott deliberately put on a voice as Phone Dude, and he's not doing that for this character. So this is the same phone guy that we heard throughout the previous 2 games, and as it turns out, he is just as corrupt as everyone else working for Fazbear Entertainment. Anyway, now that I have that out of my system, let's get back to FNaF 3. The next thing that I want to talk about is that Springlock incident that I brought up earlier in the video that happens at a sister location. This was probably a very public event, considering the fact that Fazbear Entertainment is actually doing something about it. Considering they have protocol to follow if someone were to experience a Springlock failure, which is essentially just telling them to die in private, it's safe to assume that they're more or less okay with the possibility of their employees dying. In fact, I'd be surprised if employees haven't already been killed by the Springlocks at this point. So the fact that they're actually taking safety precautions makes me think that something happened that they can't hide from. So, in response to this happening, all of the classic suits are being retired to an appropriate location, and the employees were expected to wear temporary costumes provided on short notice, and to deflect any questions about relevance. It's likely that these costumes were things that they had lying around from Murray's that they weren't doing anything with. I also wouldn't be surprised if the spring locks that they'd been using originated from Murray's as well, considering they're operated by a hand crank, just like nearly everything that we see in Murray's costume manner. But considering the fact that there's still a chance of death, and the spring locks we actually use in Secret of the Mimic seem to not have this issue, it's likely that these aren't the updated designs that are much safer. Now, follow me on this logic. We're at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and at this point, it's been open for a decent while, which we can determine from the phone call I played earlier that hints at the MCI, which takes place in 1985. So if the person listening to this tape when it was first recorded was an entertainer that wore mascot costumes, then it's pretty safe to assume that they were wearing costumes of the core 4 characters associated with Freddy Fazbear's Pizza at this point in time. This feels especially true considering that if these animatronics were the ones that could just walk around during the day whenever they wanted to, that there would be no need for Fazbear Entertainment to hire people for this job. But since entertainers still have a job, and considering Freddy Fazbear's Pizza has been open for about 2 years at this point, I can conclude that they were wearing costumes of the core 4 by this point in the timeline. Another thing that I can conclude is that the classic suits that got recalled are still in the building. This is because Ralph specifically warns people to not touch, activate, or wear the classic suits anymore, and later on brings up the fact that the Spring Bonnie costume is still there and has been moved in a message that is talking exclusively about what's been going on in the safe room recently. So, why is all this important? What big point could I possibly be drawing from this? Well, let's start off with the most important part. The core 4 of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy are all in the safe room. A big reason that I'm so confident in this is because of the MCI. As we know, there are cameras all over Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, in just about every single room, except for the safe room. And according to FNaF 1, one thing that we know was seen on the cameras was a person in an animatronic costume luring children to a back room. It's pretty obvious that this is William Afton luring children away as Spring Bonnie, and considering he was seen luring kids away, but never seen murdering the kids, we can conclude that there was no security footage of it, which means that it almost certainly happened in the one room that there were no security cameras in, the safe room. There was also no security footage of any dead children being stuffed into animatronics. Otherwise, well, they would have been missing, they would have been found rather quickly, which means the core 4 were also in the safe room at this point in time. And that's where the kids were stuffed into them. And keep in mind, the safe room is specifically reserved for equipment and/or other property not currently being used. All of this put together, we're left with the conclusion that I've been building up to for the entire video. The only reason that the core 4 would be in the safe room following all of the classic suits being recalled due to the spring locking incident would be that the core 4 were also Springlock suits at this time. And if they were Springlock suits, and the MCI kids were all stuffed into them, that means that every single MCI victim suffered a Springlock failure. And believe it or not, this makes sense with everything that we know. Like I said earlier, since we have actual entertainers wearing costumes for the Core 4, that means that these aren't dedicated animatronics. Instead, they're suits that are using the original spring locks that Fazbear Entertainment has been using for years. And since we know that they aren't using the updated, safer spring locks that we see at Murray's, I think it's safe to say that they also aren't using the updated animatronics that we see underneath Murray's in Proto Freddy's. So, for all intents and purposes, we have no reason to believe that these animatronics are any different from the animatronics that we've seen at every other Fazbear location at this point in time. Fazbear Entertainment has cut corners at every possible opportunity in this series, and copying the work you've already done is a lot easier than making something entirely new. On top of this, Ralph specifically warns employees to not bring any customers into the safe room under any conditions. He also notes that the Spring Bonnie animatronic has been noticeably moved. Interesting detail there. Him referring to it as an animatronic means that we have a specific instance of Springlock suits being referred to as just an animatronic, which means that we can't use the Core 4 being referred to as animatronics to conclude that they aren't Springlocks. Anyway, on to the main point. I cannot imagine that Ralph would be warning people about bringing people back to the safe room if it hasn't been happening recently. Combined with the fact that the Spring Bonnie animatronic that's been locked in the safe room has been getting moved around, tells us that the MCI is definitely underway by this point in time. And considering we never hear anything about children being escorted out of the safe room when we hear about them being lured into it, I think it's entirely safe to say that they don't leave the safe room, which, again, means that they got stuffed into the animatronics while in the safe room. And since the only animatronic that are supposed to be in the safe room are animatronics not currently in use, and this is all happening after the Springlock incident that caused all of the classic suits to get recalled, yeah, the Core 4 animatronics at this point in time are Springlock suits. And all of the MCI kids suffered a Springlock failure. And you want to know the craziest part about it? Fazbear Entertainment knew. The next and final thing that we hear from Ralph in this game is that the safe rooms are getting sealed due to, quote, budget restrictions, without any kind of warning. And he specifically says not to mention this room to any family, friends, or insurance representatives. Now, if we use our heads, we'll very quickly realize something. This room being closed for budget restrictions is a total lie. It costs a grand total of $0 to keep this room there. It's a glorified storage room without any cameras. If anything, it costs money to actually hire people to construct a false wall over the old door. So the whole budget restriction excuse that Ralph gives us is a total lie. That's not the reason why the safe room is being sealed. There has to be another reason for this, some external factor that we're not being told about. And when you consider the fact that Ralph warns us not to mention this room, specifically to anyone else, it really gives off the impression that Fazbear Entertainment is trying to cover something up. But what could that be?
The classic suits are not to be touched, activated, or worn. That being said, we are free of liability. Do as you wish. As always, remember to smile. You are the face of Freddy Fazbear's team.
Fazbear Entertainment waived all liability for any employees of theirs getting hurt by the spring locks that they were instructed not to touch. So I can't imagine that it has anything to do with an employee getting hurt. But you know what they could be held liable for? Someone not employed by Fazbear Entertainment getting hurt or even killed by the spring locks, especially children. This is the real reason that the safe room was sealed off. Not for a budget cut, but to hide any and all evidence of children being killed at Freddy Fazbear's. And this idea further explains how the police were never able to find the bodies. Not only were they hidden in the animatronics, but the animatronics were hidden in a safe room that, for all intents and purposes, didn't exist. It wasn't on any of the maps, and there was no surveillance footage from them at all. This was Fazbear Entertainment's attempt at covering up the crime that William committed. At some point, they found the MCI bodies, and being the comically evil company that they are, they did everything in their power to hide the fact that it happened, to avoid any accountability. So, they hid everything related to the spring locks away in the safe room, including the very tapes that we're listening to throughout FNaF 3. Think about it. We don't hear these tapes in-game until night 2, the same night that Springtrap shows up, who, as we know, has been stuck in that safe room ever since the events of Follow Me. That's because they found the tapes in the same spot, an old safe room that has been hidden away from the general public for years. You can hear the excitement in Faux Dude's voice when he tells you about it.
Hey man, okay, I have some awesome news for you. First of all, we found some vintage audio training cassettes. Dude, these are like prehistoric. I think they were like training tapes for like other employees or something like that. So I thought we could like have them playing like over the speakers as people walk through the attraction. Dude, that makes us feel legit, man.
And after they hid everything related to the spring locks, and after the investigation the police led that went nowhere, Fazbear Entertainment discarded the children's bodies and tried using the animatronics again. Unfortunately, after having a dead body stuffed into them, the animatronics were noticeably gross. Not to mention, considering this company's track record with sanitation, they probably did a bad job of cleaning them. So the animatronics were disgusting, everyone noticed, and eventually, the building got closed down, and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza wouldn't reopen for another 2 years. At some point between the MCI being discovered and the FNaF 2 location's grand reopening, these animatronics were converted from being spring locks. This is further backed up by the fact that, in the week before, Ralph expresses that he's happy the vintage animatronics were restored to their classic appearance. If these animatronics were the ones that got retired post-Springlock incidents at the sister location, and were also the ones that had the MCI kids stuffed into them, then they were restored and turned into regular animatronics by the time of FNaF 1. Considering the FNaF 1 animatronics are some of the more obviously haunted ones in the series. This all stems from the final phone call of FNaF 3 that I referenced earlier, where Ralph says that the safe room is being sealed up without giving any warning. For the longest time, the most common interpretation of this line that I heard is that the safe room was being sealed because William had just been spring-locked, and by proxy that he'd been stuck in the safe room for an entire 30 years between the MCI happening and FNaF 3's second night. There are a multitude of reasons as to why this doesn't make sense, but the most apparent and obvious one of these reasons is that, in Follow Me, the building that William gets spring-locked in is so obviously abandoned. Everything is a complete mess. There are freely roaming rats and piles of garbage everywhere, and there are multiple rooms that have been completely boarded up. These tapes wouldn't have been recorded for an empty restaurant that's been abandoned for years, so clearly they have to have happened somewhere else before William gets spring-locked. On the other hand, the inciting factor for the safe room being sealed, being the MCI, allows for the timeline of the safe room to actually make sense, including when the false wall inevitably gets torn down so that Fazbear Entertainment can get to the animatronics and ultimately restore them. So the question becomes, after they got the animatronics out, did they seal the safe room back up, or did they leave it open? Realistically, either one is possible, but if they left it open, you run into the issue of Phone Dude needing to be told by some guy who helped design one of the buildings that the safe room existed in the first place. So I'd assume that it eventually got resealed. As the owner, William of all people would have definitely known about the room, so it's not a reach to suggest that he could have been the one to remove the false wall. Probably quite easily, in fact. If this was done as cheaply as everything else done at a Fazbear establishment, then it was probably just a sheet of drywall, which you can push your hand through with fairly little effort. And William would have definitely wanted to come back to the safe room, because as we can see, his beloved Spring Bonnie fursuit was left here for all this time. It makes sense that Fazbear Entertainment never took this suit out, considering that this is the one that was seen luring kids away on camera. It was safer to just leave this suit in the room that was being sealed up and to never use it again. But with William being William, he definitely wanted to get it back. So he opens the safe room back up, eventually dies in there, and that's what leads to Phone Dude finding him and bringing him back to Fazbear's Fright. So, how long was William there for anyway? I said it earlier, but I'll say it again. I don't think he was stuck in here for 30 years or anything ridiculous like that. For one thing, someone had to be running Fazbear Entertainment and Afton Robotics, and if William's been out of commission for 30 years, then who else could have been doing it? And sure, the Spring Bonnie suit is really gross in FNaF 3, having a bunch of holes in it and such, but I don't think that indicates 30 years of damage, especially because in the movie, the Spring Bonnie suit has all of those holes in it before William gets spring-locked in it. And trust me, if his corpse was trapped in that suit decaying for 30 years, there wouldn't be a body anymore. I mean, look at Springtrap in FNaF 6. He's missing an entire arm. If that's what happened between the events of FNaF 3 and FNaF 6, can you imagine what would be left of him after 30 years? Speaking of FNaF 6, I want to bring up Henry now. If William got spring-locked fairly recently, that would be a pretty good reason for Henry to show up again after FNaF 3. If William went missing, he'd probably be contacted to take responsibility of Fazbear Entertainment around the time of FNaF 6. This coincides with the fact that, based on the way he talks in FNaF 6's Insanity ending, it sounds like he's been going through a rather recent revelation about William's actions.
It's only now that I understand the depth of the depravity of this creature, this monster that I unwillingly helped to create. As if what he had already done wasn't enough. He found a new way to desecrate, to humiliate, to destroy. As if the suffering wasn't enough. The loss of innocence, the loss of everything to so many people. Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose, and used in ways I never thought imaginable. He lured them all back to a familiar place, back with familiar tricks. He brought them all together. Are they still aware? I hope not. It keeps me awake at night. I could make myself sleep, but not yet. Not until I undo what he has done and heal this wound.
I think that after getting called back to Fazbear Entertainment to handle William's job, he unearthed everything that William was doing behind closed doors. He probably went to visit all of the properties that he was now going to oversee, including the Sinister location bunker, which would explain how and why he got his hands on the Scooper blueprints. It would also explain why Henry's implementing controlled shocks into the salvage sections of the game, because he learned about it while he was down in the bunker. This also might be how he learns that Elizabeth is a part of Scrap Baby, but I don't think that there were any internal documents about that anywhere, so maybe not. I don't know. Speaking of internal documents, if you've taken a look at the Scott Games source code while Sister Location was being teased, you'll probably have noticed that internal documents for Seabears seem to be obfuscated. This is probably why Henry never shut down Seabears, assuming that he took control of it before Mike went down there in Sister Location. But that gets into Sister Location's placement of the timeline, and I have not thought about that enough to say anything concrete about it, so I won't dwell on that for too long. The final piece of evidence that I want to bring up in this video comes from the FNaF movie. I understand that it's a different continuity, but this is so on the nose that I think it's worth mentioning. Firstly, to recap, I'm of the belief that the MCI kids are all Springlock victims as a result of this theory. And in the FNaF movie, after Golden Freddy lures Abby to the pizzeria, Vanessa warns Mike that
they want to make her like them.
And to do this, we see Chica trying to shove Abby into a Springlock Ella doll. In an attempt to make Abby like them, the animatronics literally try to Springlock her. This is hilariously on the nose for this franchise. Does it mean anything? Personally, I think it does, but I can understand why someone would hesitate to agree with that, considering it's a separate continuity and all. But with that, I'm gonna stop things here. Thanks for watching. Honestly, this felt like a complete crack theory when we first started making it, and I wasn't even convinced of it for the longest time. But after working on it for a while, I now think that the evidence kinda flows together naturally. It feels like the conclusions we came to are just the natural progression of what we're told is happening, and I think that at the very least, what I've brought up here is worth discussing. So if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe for more. And expect a bigger FNaF 3 video sometime in October, assuming nothing horribly wrong happens. And with that, I'm out of here. Take it easy.